Greetings dear friends, Dragon here once again, and here today to talk to you about Born to Fly, just released yesterday in the UK by CIne onto Blu-ray and onto DVD, and one that wasn't actually on my radar, no pun intended, but CIne very kindly sent it to me for review, and I'm stoked that they did, because I really enjoyed it. And before we get into the review of it, which I'll try and do as quick as I can, I first think we should address the Tom Cruise / Top Gun elephant in the room, because almost every single review I've seen of the movie has kind of compared it usually unfavourably to Top Gun, which I think is unfair and does the movie a bit of a disservice. It's a little bit of a kind of lazy comparison to make, and purely the fact that both the movies have kind of fighter planes in them, but that's about as much as the comparison ends. There are certainly kind of maybe some people who've done a deep dive in to look at various shots that they're arguing have been replicated between the two films, but I think they're very different animals, and we'll kind of get to why in the review. But I think it's kind of worth mentioning that there's been loads of movies about fighter pilots and about planes in general, particularly about kind of military air forces. Pretty much every single country that has any form of air force has made movies about it at some sort of point, and certainly China has made loads of these sort of movies before, and kind of going all the way back to 1958 when they made Chang Kong Bi, which at that point was about kind of Chinese pilots going up against the Koreans in war, and then certainly Britain had its own spate of doing those sort of movies when Britain still had a film industry, most notably in Battle of Britain in 1969, but one with my favourite title, Johnny in the Clouds from 1945, which is a little bit more about a kind of a new recruit's experiences. But yeah, every single country has done these sorts of movies, and the last time that China turned its attention to this sort of type of movie, both times it was compared to the original Top Gun. I think they made Sky Fighters in 2011 and Sky Hunter in 2017, Sky Hunter with Fan Bingbing. And we're about to see another one coming out from India, Fighter, in 2024, which is already being compared as India's answer to Top Gun. So Top Gun, I should be very quick to point out, and I'm sure I'm probably going to get a huge amount of kickback, but please, I'm not a film critic, I'm just a guy who likes movies. I never really cared for the original Top Gun. I found it weirdly homoerotic, never really understood the appeal. There was other Tony Scott and other Tom Cruise movies that I connected with much more. Haven't seen Top Gun Maverick. At some point, I'm sure I will get around to it, because I do like that director, Joseph Kosinski. But as going into this, I certainly hadn't seen Top Gun Maverick. But what I was interested to kind of find out about the movie was really how much of it was not about what I thought it was going to be about. And the reason that I kind of thought it was going to be a Top Gun-esque movie about dogfights was because that was how it largely was being sold to me by most of the reviews that I checked out. And that's really just, like I say, doing the movie a disservice. I think if you're going to compare it to any movie, better to compare it to The Right Stuff, which looked at kind of America's test pilots and kind of the group of guys who would go on to become the first wave of astronauts, and to some extent some of the stuff in the For All Mankind documentary, which is about some of the really early NASA tests. Because this is a movie, make no mistake, about test pilots. This is not really a movie about fighter pilots at war. This is a movie about test pilots and how dangerous that job is, kind of really trying to work out the nuts and bolts of new technology and implement it into something that is already incredibly dangerous, and how often that can kind of go wrong. And really sort of the film itself, directed by Liu Xiaoshi, deals with a relatively new recruit to a program to kind of find out who's going to be the next main sort of commanding test pilot. Our main sort of principal character, played by Wang Yibo, he's playing a character called Li Yu, though they've kind of given him the call sign in the movie of Shuke, and Shuke is a little bit of an in-joke for Chinese audiences. Shuke is one half of a pair of characters from The Adventure of Shuke and Beta, who are two mice who decide they don't want to sell food, so they decide to start their own airline. One pilots a plane or a helicopter, the other one pilots a tank, and they go off and start an airline to help other animals, and that's the way that they're going to get food. So yeah, he's called Shuke, and I think that's the fact that he's kind of picked a mouse as his sort of spirit animal, and this should tell you really how far this is removed from the sort of testosterone-filled machismo of Top Gun. So yeah, he arrives basically after having an initial encounter with some foreign pilots who basically are kind of suspect are American pilots at the beginning, who outclass him by the fact they've got much better planes. He's offered the chance to kind of come and try out for a spot in the test pilots group. He's kind of approached by the senior kind of pilot there, who's for me the heart and soul of the movie, who's played by Hu Jan. He's playing a character called Zhang, and Hu Jan I had seen in a few things, but most notably Infernal Affairs 2 and Redcliffe and in Zhang Yimou's Shadow. So he's been around for quite a long time, and I kind of found most of the scenes that I really engaged with were with him. And then there's if we're going with the Top Gun comparison, that the Iceman style character, his rival, who is not really a rival at all, one of the other test pilots who's basically better than him, is played by Yu Shi, he's playing Ding Feng, who's kind of outclassing him from the pure aviation side. So from the kind of the technical aspects of actually flying the plane, his performances are all kind of better, and so he's kind of outclassing him, and it's looking like he's going to be picked as the sort of next candidate. The rest of the cast is rounded out by the kind of one main female character here, who they list as a guest star, and it's played by Zhu Dongyu, who's kind of one of the more seasoned actors. She's been in a whole bunch of movies, and she's there as kind of basically a sort of nurse who's assisting and looking after, making sure that the test pilots are healthy enough to keep on going to kind of various incidents. So yeah, almost every single scene that we see in planes in this movie, certainly for the bulk of the film's running time, you're just watching one plane and you're just seeing them really trying to kind of work out the new technology involved to make China's first stealth plane. So they're kind of trying to work out the engine and trying to work out really how to kind of make the engine function in the plane units that they have without any kind of errors occurring. So it's a twin seat plane, so most of the time you're having the senior pilot, Hu Jian or Zhang, going up with our new kind of young newcomer, and they're kind of working out the nuts and bolts of what's going on. There is a sort of fairly tragic, no kind of bones about, there's no way to kind of like sugarcoat this, there's a death in the middle of the movie where the senior instructor kind of meets his end. Sorry, mild spoilers, but I do think that that's kind of a big part of why this movie has been made, and we'll get to that in a bit. And really after that sort of point, they then have to kind of try and work out what's gone wrong, and it kind of delves into a little bit more of the engineering, the science behind what the test pilots are having to try and do. And that's really where Wang Yibo, his character, kind of finds his sort of main strength, his main area, less so in piloting and more in the engineering aspect. He's kind of able to kind of devise the new technology that they need to ensure that this accident doesn't repeat itself. And he's pretty badly injured in the accident when his senior officer is killed. And there's a huge amount of reverence given to test pilots who've done this job before, and certainly the film uses as a pretty big location that they return to a number of times, the graveyard of the real test pilots who died, kind of basically putting together kind of China's Air Force program. And so it's certainly paying a huge amount of respect, and also very aware of the fact that in these sort of situations people die, and that's kind of very counterpoint to the way that an awful lot of kind of American movies that deal with war often tend to be. I mean, I think they rarely dive into the kind of the realistic consequences of war, and it gets kind of sold to us as being always a kind of very exciting and very glamorous thing, when the reality is when people die it sucks. And this movie is very, very quick to embrace that fact, and kind of pretty emotionally so. So I think the emotional connection to the character who passes away in the middle of the film is really felt by all the main cast, and we kind of see that. We don't wallow in it, where the kind of plot doesn't kind of stop the movie in those sort of moments, but it is really heartfelt. By the time when it comes around, you've sort of invested in these characters. They're really well portrayed, they're really well acted, and particularly Hu Jian is an exceptionally good actor, so there's a lot of heart to his performance, and the relationship between him and the younger pilots is really good. There's a kind of mutual respect there, but also enough kind of jokes when they kind of come around to kind of keep things a little bit more lighthearted, but there's a gravity to it in a way that I kind of found pretty easy to connect with. And so I think really that's where the bulk of the film revolves around. It's much more about the test pilots, what they do, how they do it, trying to keep themselves safe while they're developing the kind of the new elements required to kind of make this plane come together, at which they ultimately are able to do so. And then the film is bookended right at the very, very end with another scene when they kind of come up against foreign pilots. Nobody gets shot down. There's not a single enemy pilot destroyed. They do destroy two kind of controlled drones, is their kind of, I think, their way of kind of showing that they're now at a level of being able to kind of match the other nations' planes. But it wasn't really coming across to me as any sort of patriotic or propaganda style look at how incredible the might of our Air Force is. It was much more about what it took for them to kind of get to that point. They were played very much as the underdog, certainly in the first encounter, and then they've kind of reached an even keel by the time that the film reaches its end. And then I think the kind of biggest indication of what the filmmaker was trying to do comes in the end credits, where we get a series of transmissions from real test pilots in China who realized that they weren't going to make it home. They were going to crash and they were going to die. And so we hear the actual audio recordings that they made back to base, basically sending messages to their loved ones or saying that they weren't going to be able to kind of make it back. And that's hard not to get choked up at, really, after you've kind of seen really the fictional plight of these kind of characters doing what they do, and then you're kind of encountered really with the reality of it, the fact that it is grounded in, whilst it not be a completely true story, it's certainly taking an awful lot of real emotions and real situations and then turning it into something that can be a cinematic experience. So for me, I thought it worked really, really well, and that's coming from somebody who's not a super huge fan of these sorts of movies in general, so I was kind of pretty surprised with how much I connected with it and how much I enjoyed it. So if you are on the fence about it and you're just thinking that it's going to be a Top Gun clone, it's certainly not. And if you enjoyed Top Gun, there's a good chance that you'll enjoy this for different reasons, but please don't go into it expecting that it is just going to be China's answer to Top Gun or China's answer to Top Gun Maverick. I don't think that is true at all, and I think that, like I say at the beginning, that does it a disservice. So please, if it's one that you've been on the fence about, I would encourage you to give it a look. The Blu-ray that I have here looks incredible, so it looks really, really good. There's a trailer on here, and there's no other extra features on the disc, but it doesn't really need it. I think the kind of film's pretty self-explanatory. Try not to look too much at stuff online that's kind of really pretty negative, and most of the reviews that I've seen from the mainstream media certainly have been. There's an element of sort of low-level racism or anti-Chinese sentiment in an awful lot of the kind of the mainstream press reviews that I kind of find a little bit hard to take. And there occasionally you do see somebody who's able to put a bit of proper perspective on it, and I would send you towards, if you do want to read an actual critic's review, to Saran Manvel over the Critic's Notebook, and I'll leave a link down to her review below, because I thought she absolutely nailed it. She's an American critic, but really I thought her take on the movie was really accurate, really, and I'm not just saying that because I largely agreed with what she thought of it. I thought she was very fair and very balanced in her understanding of the movie, and didn't just kind of compare it, as every other critic does, to Top Gun, because like I say, I think it's something an awful lot more heartfelt than that. I think it has a little bit more to say, and something that I would consider of having a little bit more value, and certainly found a lot more enjoyable to watch. The effects in it are really good. I suspect there have been a large amount of real planes used. They certainly had the full support of the Chinese military and the Chinese Air Force to do this. That's not uncommon at all, and certainly Top Gun was made in exactly the same way. And I think, if I remember from the original Top Gun came out, the Navy had recruiting stands set up at cinemas around America, pulling people in and actually signing them up to the Navy. So I think certainly Top Gun was absolutely doing that same thing, and it's weird that some people are totally fine with that when it's coming out of America, but then for some reason can't get past that fact if other countries are making similar content. And I've certainly not seen any recruitment drive coming through on Chinese social media trying to encourage anybody who's watching the movie to sign up to the Chinese Air Force. I think it's just a movie that's trying to really honour the lineage of their test pilots rather than their fighter pilots. So yeah, again, 2 thumbs way up for me. I really, really enjoyed it. A huge thanks to CineAsia for sending me through a copy. I wasn't expecting to enjoy it nearly as much as I did, and I hope that if you give it a chance, I really, really hope you guys enjoy it too. Thank you so much for watching this. I've been the Fanatical Dragon. I'll see you on the next one. Take care.